All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep into networks. We've got some slides here from Fundamentals of Networks by Raji Gogolapati, and we're going to see how the core ideas apply to you.
Yeah, networks are everywhere, right? They're often operating behind the scenes,
Oh,
and understanding them can be really eye-opening.
I'm all about those aha. All right, get ready. The slides kick off with social network models. Basically, networks are more than just, like who you know on the surface, right? There's all these other layers, like we see clustering and social attractions, even those times when everyone in the audience starts clapping together.
Oh yeah, those moments where everyone just starts clapping.
Yeah.
That's a great example of how actions can just cascade through a network. Like you might clap because the person next to you is doing it, and all of a sudden the whole room is erupting. Just a simple example, but it shows you the power of those network effects.
It's like we're all connected by these invisible threads, and those threads can transmit, like behaviors, ideas, emotions, all sorts of things. So speaking of connections, the slides mention hubs and connectors. Are those just like any random people in the network?
Oh, no, definitely not. Hubs are like the power players, the people or groups with tons of connections. They're the influencers, the thought leaders, the ones everyone seems to know. Connectors, though they might not have as many direct connections, but they're the ones bridging different groups. You know, they introduce you to someone new, or they connect ideas that seem totally separate.
So hubs are like the stars, and connectors are like the talent scouts. The slides also make this interesting point about visibility and the number of links. The more connected you are, the more visible you are, which then attracts even more connections.
Exactly, it's a self-reinforcing cycle. And it leads to something really important, the slides highlight that bias exists everywhere.
What does that even mean when it comes to networks?
Well, it's not always about intentional discrimination. It can just emerge naturally from the structure of the network.
Wait, so just the way a network is structured can give certain people or ideas more influence, even if they don't deserve it.
That's right. Imagine a social network where people tend to connect with others who share their views. Over time, those views get amplified within that cluster. That's how echo chambers form, is like bias is baked into the network itself.
So even with the best intentions, networks can create and reinforce biases, huh? That's a lot to think about. The slides even ask, is it a democratic web? I guess the answer isn't so simple, is it?
No, it's definitely complex. On the one hand, the internet has given us so much access to information, and it's connected people across the world. But, like we've been talking about, network dynamics can concentrate influence. Certain voices get amplified over others.
So the internet could be democratizing, but the structure of networks can introduce new inequalities. It's a tricky balance. Which takes us perfectly to the next section in the slides: power laws and scale-free networks. Here they talk about the rich get richer, but instead of wealth, it's about connections.
Right, it's like a few nodes in the network have a massive number of connections, while most others have very few. This pattern is called a power law distribution, and it's surprisingly common.
So it's not just about popularity, there's actual math behind it. The slides even give this crazy example. A node with only 4 degrees of connectivity makes up like 116th of the whole network.
Exactly. That's a classic sign of a scale-free network. These networks aren't random. They grow in a specific way based on preferential attachment. The more connections a node has, the more likely it is to attract even more. Think about websites like Google or Amazon.
Oh, right, they started small, but they grew exponentially as more people used them, which attracted even more users and content and everything. So it's not just that they offer good services, the structure of their networks help them succeed.
Exactly, they became hubs, attracting way more traffic and influence. This shapes so much of our online world. It's not just websites, social media, academic citations, even trends.
So it's like these networks are self-fulfilling prophecies in a way. The popular keep getting more popular, and the less connected nodes, well, they just can't catch up. But wait, if these networks are dominated by a few powerful hubs, doesn't that make them vulnerable? What if one of those hubs just disappears?
That's a great point. It leads us to the idea of resilience and fragility in these scale-free networks. They can be super robust in some ways, but they can also be susceptible to failures if a key hub goes down. And that brings us to our last topic for this part of our deep dive: transmission and virality.
Now this is where networks and everyday life really connect. You wouldn't think networks and viruses go together, but these slides show a clear link.
Right, and it's not just about literal viruses either. Think about how information spreads through social networks. or ideas or behaviors. The same principles apply. The slides mention this idea of entanglement of complex systems, which sounds kind of intimidating, but it just means how we behave individually can have big consequences at the network level.
So even small actions like sharing an article or staying home when you're sick can ripple through our networks in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this concept of citizen-based medicine comes in. It's like we're not just receiving healthcare passively, we have a role to play in shaping the health of our communities.
So by understanding these network dynamics, we can make choices that benefit not just ourselves, but the whole network. It's collective action, but amplified.
Precisely. And since we're talking about how networks influence how things spread, got to talk about the R0 model. It's super important for understanding how quickly something might spread, like a virus, information, anything.
Okay, everyone, time for some math. Don't worry, we'll break it down. So the slides give us a formula for R0, right? Can you walk us through it?
Sure. Basically, R0 is the average number of people one infected person will transmit a virus to, assuming everyone else is susceptible. The formula they give is R0 equals N constant multiplied by P spread divided by P recovery.
Okay, so what are all those constants and probabilities?
So N constant is the average number of contacts an infected person has. P spread is the probability of transmission happening during each contact. And P recovery is the probability of an infected person recovering within a certain time, or basically being removed from the pool of people who can spread it.
So the higher the N constant and P spread, and the lower the P recovery, the higher the R0, and the more likely the virus is to spread quickly.
Exactly. If R0 is greater than 1, the outbreak's going to grow. But if it's less than 1, meaning each person transmits to less than one other person, then the outbreak will probably die out on its own.
It's amazing how these math models can help us understand complex things, like disease outbreaks. And it all comes back to networks, doesn't it? The way we're connected influences how things spread, whether it's a virus, an idea, whatever.
Absolutely. That's what makes network science so powerful. It's a framework for understanding these invisible forces that shape our world.
That's a great point to pause for now. In part 2, we'll dive into even more fascinating implications of these network concepts, from social dynamics to tech innovation. And we'll start connecting these ideas back to your own lives and experiences.
Welcome back.
Shaping these networks.
And by understanding network science, we can be more intentional about how we navigate and influence these connections.
It's empowering, isn't it? We're not just along for the ride. We have choices. We can build bridges, amplify good voices, and make a difference.
Absolutely. But for now, let's take a short break. When we come back in part 3, we'll tie everything together and explore how you can apply these insights from network science to your own life and to the world around you.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered a lot about networks, haven't we?
We have. It's been quite a journey. From those synchronized clapping moments to the power of Google. It's amazing how these network principles are everywhere, shaping trends and even like global pandemic.
I love getting into the theory, but I also want to make it practical. So what are the key takeaways here? What does all this mean for you listening in your everyday life?
Well, the biggest thing to remember is that you're part of this web of connections. You're not just an individual. You're a node in multiple networks. And everything you do, your choices, even small interactions, have ripple effects.
It's like no man is an island, right? We're all connected, whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And that connection creates opportunities and responsibilities.
Yeah.
We can influence others positively, start movements, spread kindness. But we also need to be aware of the potential for negative stuff. Like think about misinformation spreading or how negativity can take over a workplace.
So it's not just about knowing how networks work. It's about being aware of our own influence and using it wisely. We've talked about clustering, preferential attachment, power laws. These aren't just abstract ideas. They're shaping our world every day.
And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You start noticing these patterns everywhere, how connections concentrate, how influence works, how small actions can have huge effects.
It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
It is. It shows us we're not just pawns in some game. We have agency.
Yeah.
We can build connections, support good things, make a difference.
And challenge those biases that exist within networks, right? Whether they're intentional or just like a side effect of how the network's built.
Absolutely. We can try to get different perspectives, amplify marginalized voices, advocate for fairness and equity in the networks we're part of.
So it's a two-part thing. Be mindful of how networks work and then use that knowledge for good. But how can people actually do that? What are some concrete things our listeners can start doing today?
Well, one thing is to diversify your own networks, both online and offline. Connect with people who have different backgrounds and experiences than you. Challenge yourself and be open to learning.
Step outside those comfort zones and embrace diversity, right? What else?
Be mindful of what you share online. Think about who benefits from that information and whether it's making the world a better, more informed place.
Don't just retweet stuff without thinking about it first.
Exactly. And lastly, don't be afraid to speak up for positive change. Call out injustice, support good causes, use your voice.
It's about remembering that our actions, big or small, matter, and together they can make a real difference.
That brings us to our final thought for you to consider. Think about the networks you're in. Online communities, work, family, friends. How are these ideas of power laws and preferential attachment showing up in your life? Where can you make positive change, connect with people, use your influence for good?
That's a great question to think about. It's not just about understanding networks, it's about actively shaping them to reflect our values and what we want to see in the world.
Because in the end, the future depends on the choices we make, individually and together, within the networks that connect us all.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of networks. We hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, and feel inspired to use your network power wisely. Until next time, keep on learning and exploring.